Marcus Jackson froze as Principal Whitmore's voice echoed through the auditorium. "Let's have the janitor's boy show us what he knows about classical music." Laughter erupted, but it didn't last long. Marcus's fingers trembled as they touched the keys. One note, then another dot. Silence fell. Jaws dropped. But before we dive into how one moment on stage changed everything for Marcus, hit that like button if you've ever been underestimated, and subscribe to hear stories that inspire. Let's begin. Marcus Jackson, 14, walked the polished halls of Westbrook High with his head down. His dad, Calvin, had just cleaned those floors, something no one at this wealthy suburban Atlanta school noticed. Except, of course, Principal Whitmore. Once a respected music teacher, Calvin now worked as the school janitor. It wasn't what he'd trained for, but it got Marcus into a school with working resources, something their old neighborhood didn't offer since budget cuts shut down. Harmony Arts Academy. They lived just outside the district, using Calvin's sister's address to enroll Marcus. After losing Marcus's mom to cancer and their home to mounting bills, the Jacksons were just trying to hold on. At Westbrook, Marcus was invisible except in music class with the kind-hearted Mrs. Bennett. She was the only teacher who seemed to see him, and every afternoon, while waiting for his father to finish work, Marcus discovered a quiet haven, the unlocked music room. There he played the Steinway grand piano alone, pouring his soul into the keys. Self-taught through YouTube and online tutorials, Marcus had inherited perfect pitch from his late mother, who once told him, "You hear what others don't." Music was his connection to her, but at school, the bullying never stopped. "Hey, janitor's kid," sneered Bradley Williams, son of a board member, as he demanded Marcus move from an empty lunch table. The message was always the same: no, your place. That moment in the cafeteria, like so many others, burned inside Marcus. But it would be nothing compared to what came next when Principal Whitmore tried to shame him in front of the entire school, and got the shock of his life. As the class settled in, the intercom crackled. "Reminder, our annual Spring Arts Showcase is next Friday. Participation is open to students with formal training." Mrs. Bennett sighed. "It used to be for anyone who loved the arts," she muttered. Marcus sat up. A flicker of hope stirred in his chest, quickly buried. That stage wasn't for someone like him. But everything changed that Tuesday in history class. Mr. Davis, Westbrook's only black teacher, asked, "Who can name musicians from the Harlem Renaissance?" Silence. Then Bradley smirked. "Michael Jackson." Laughter followed. Something in Marcus broke. Actually, it was Duke Ellington, Louis Armstrong, Bessie Smith. The room fell silent. "That's correct, Mr. Jackson," Mr. Davis said, impressed. But Bradley leaned over, voice low and venomous. "Look at the janitor's kid playing professor." Marcus muttered back, "I know more about classical music than you ever will." "Really?" Bradley sneered. "What, did your dad teach you between mopping floors?" That night, Principal Whitmore made a chilling announcement over the intercom. "At tomorrow's PTA meeting, we'll preview talent from our entire student body." The emphasis made Marcus's stomach drop. At the meeting, Marcus and his father, Calvin, sat in the back, out of place among tailored suits and luxury handbags. Whitmore took the stage. "We pride ourselves on tradition," he said, glancing at the Jacksons. Then, with a smirk, "I understand we have a student who claims knowledge of classical music. Marcus Jackson, come up and show us." Whispers filled the room. Phones were raised. Laughter bubbled in the front rows. Calvin looked confused, then furious. Marcus stood frozen, but he remembered his mother's words. "When the world silences you, let your music speak." He sat at the piano, hands trembling. He began to play Chopin's Nocturne in E-flat major. Soft notes filled the auditorium. Laughter stopped. Phones lowered. Marcus's fingers grew confident, his body swaying with the music. When the final note faded, silence hung heavy till Mrs. Bennet stood, eyes glistening, and began to clap. The room erupted in applause. Calvin wept quietly, pride on his face. Mrs. Bennet approached, whispering, "How long have you been playing?" Before Marcus could answer, Principal Whitmore stepped in, flustered. "Well, an impressive party trick, I suppose," he said, trying to minimize what everyone had just witnessed. But it was too late. The boy he tried to humiliate had just left the entire room in awe. A voice broke the silence. That was no party trick. The boy's talented. Several parents nodded. Bradley leaned toward his father, scoffing. He must have practiced just that one piece. No way he actually knows music. Thomas Williams stood up. "Then let's test him. Anyone can memorize a single piece." Principal Whitmore latched on. "Excellent point. Musical literacy is more than mimicry." Mrs. Bennet stepped forward, her tone steely. "Fine. Marcus, do you know Clair de Lune, or perhaps something more complex? Mozart's Sonata? No. 16. Batches, Prelude, in C major." Marcus nodded after each. "Let's hear the batch," she said, "and explain it first." Marcus took a breath. Batch wrote this to explore well-tempered tuning. It uses arpeggiated chords to build harmonic progressions around an implied melody. Then he played. Where Chopin had been emotional, Batch was clean, crystalline. The audience was transfixed. The applause afterward was thunderous. Calvin Jackson stood weeping. Mrs. Bennet beamed. "How did you learn?" Calvin asked, voice cracking. "After Mom died, I waited in the music room, taught myself with videos." The auditorium hushed. The implications were clear. No lessons, no tutors, no privilege, just raw, unstoppable talent. Mrs. Bennet turned to the room. "In 35 years, I've seen only a few students with such ability. What Marcus has is rand real." Principal Whitmore cleared his throat. "Yes, well, the showcase has formal requirements. I'll mentor him myself." Mrs. Bennet interrupted. "As faculty, that qualifies as formal training." Whitmore bristled. "Westbrook isn't a charity. You've always said this was about talent." Thomas Williams cut in. "Well, you've got it. Right here." Whitmore scowled. Meeting adjourned. As the room emptied, parents approached Marcus and Calvin, offering congratulations. For the first time, people truly saw Marcus. But from across the room, Whitmore was speaking in hushed tones to board members, his face dark. The triumph felt real, but Marcus sensed it came with a price. The next morning, everything was different. "Students," whispered as Marcus walked past, "that's him, the janitor's kid who played Chopin." In class, Zoe Chen from orchestra sat beside him. "Did you really teach yourself?" she asked. But Bradley wasn't done. "Enjoy your 15 minutes. Charity case," he sneered. His voice held something new, fear. By lunch, a video of Marcus's performance was spreading online. The comments ranged from awe to racist skepticism. "Must be staged. No way a kid like that learned on his own." During 5th period, he was called to the counselor's office. Mrs. Patel smiled politely. "Your performance was remarkable. But Principal Whitmore asked me to look into your enrollment. There may be issues with your address." Marcus sat frozen as she subtly questioned whether he belonged at Westbrook at all. When it ended, he stepped into the hallway shaken. Mrs. Bennet was waiting. "Everything all right?" "He's very curious about where I live now." Her expression tightened. "How interesting that this curiosity only arose after you performed." She squeezed his shoulder. "Come to the music room after class. Let's begin your first real lesson." But when Marcus arrived, the door was locked. A new sign read, "Authorized personnel only, see main office." Through the small window, a security guard stood inside. Just then, Mrs. Bennet turned the corner, her face darkening as she saw the door. Open windows. As the bus pulled away, Marcus took in the familiar sights. This was the neighborhood his family had left behind when Westbrook became their chance for something more. Now, he wasn't sure what more really meant. The Harmony Community Center sat on a corner, surrounded by basketball courts and a modest garden. Inside, the building smelled like old books and floor wax. A receptionist looked up as Marcus entered. "You must be Marcus," Mr. Davis called ahead. "The piano's in the rec room down the hall, second left." The piano was a beat-up upright, worn keys and all, but it was tuned. Marcus sat down and exhaled. His fingers hovered above the keys, then pressed down, soft at first, then firmer. The room filled with the sound of a Liszt etude, raw, powerful, imperfect. But his dot, and for the first time since the showcase, Marcus felt like himself again. That night, Marcus returned home to find his father asleep at the kitchen table, paperwork still clutched in one hand. A blanket had been draped over Calvin's shoulders, likely by a neighbor who'd stopped in. The apartment felt too small for all the pressure weighing on them. Marcus quietly set his backpack down and pulled out the sheet music Mrs. Bennet had accidentally left him. He knew what they were doing, all of them, helping in the only ways they could. It wasn't just about playing piano anymore. It was about proving that he belonged and refusing to be erased. The following Tuesday, Marcus stood outside 1422 Oakwood Drive, his heart pounding. The house was large, gated, and silent. He slipped through the side entrance, following Zoe's instructions, and let himself into the sunroom where a gleaming baby grand piano stood beneath skylights. A note rested on the bench: Tuesday and Thursday nights. Don't get caught. That night, he practiced until his hands ached. The music soaring through the empty house like a rebellion. School. The Cold War with Principal Whitmore escalated. The disciplinary hearing was scheduled. Calvin was called in twice more for compliance meetings. Marcus's locker was vandalized again, this time with slurs etched into the metal. But the quiet support kept coming. A student in orchestra slipped him a copy of their concert program, whispering, "You should have been on this." Ms. Rodriguez quietly waived late fees when Marcus returned 3 music theory books, overdue. Zoe, who never asked for thanks, began joining him in secret for late-night piano-violin duets. It was the only time she ever smiled. And then one morning, Mrs. Bennet announced something that changed everything. Due to an unprecedented number of student appeals, we'll be holding auditions for the Spring Arts Showcase. Talent will be the only criterion. The room buzzed. Marcus looked at her, and she gave the tiniest nod. It was back on Marcus's chance to perform at the cost of his father's job and their dignity, or stand their ground and risk everything. Calvin didn't respond right away. He asked for time. That night, he laid it all out for Marcus as they sat on folding chairs in their temporary church apartment. "They're trying to buy our silence," Calvin said. "But if I take this deal, I'm telling them they were right to treat us like this. That you only deserve to be on that stage if we admit we were wrong for ever coming here." Marcus stared at his father. "And if we don't, then you might not get to perform at Westbrook," Calvin said softly. "But maybe that's not the stage that matters." 3 days later, the residency hearing convened in a sterile district office meeting room. The panel included Principal Whitmore, a district superintendent, and 2 school board members, one of whom was Bradley's father. Calvin and Marcus sat at one end of the table. Marjorie Turner sat beside them, legal pad open, every expression calm but razor sharp. Community members packed the hallway outside. Churchgoers, musicians, students, even parents from Westbrook, who had started to question what was happening. Principal Whitmore began with practiced formality. "The matter before us is a clear violation of district policy on unauthorized enrollment due to falsified residency documentation, as well as improper use of school facilities." Marjorie interrupted with surgical precision. before we proceed further, I'd like to enter into record-signed affidavits from Mr. Jackson's landlord, utility providers, and neighbors, confirming legal residence within district bounds." She handed over a thick folder. Whitmore's face tightened. "Be that as it may, and I'd also like to submit testimony." She added that a pattern of policy manipulation has occurred at Westbrook, disproportionately affecting students of color, including last-minute changes to showcase eligibility criteria after a student of exceptional ability emerged. Murmurs rippled through the room. "None of that is relevant to the residency," Whitmore snapped. "It speaks to motive," Marjorie countered, "which is highly relevant when considering whether this process is administrative or retaliatory." The board members exchanged glances. One, clearly uncomfortable, cleared his throat. "Let's take a brief recess to review this material." While the adults conferred behind closed doors, Marcus waited in the hallway, heart pounding. Supporters greeted him quietly, fists tapped, shoulders squeezed. Even Zoe's grandmother appeared, placing a soft hand on his arm. "Courage, young man," she said. "In every language, it means to act from the heart." When the hearing resumed, the board made no eye contact with Whitmore. "The documentation confirms district residency," the lead board member announced. "No policy violation occurred. Mr. Jackson's employment status remains unchanged. The disciplinary process is hereby concluded." Marcus couldn't move, couldn't speak. Whitmore stood, jaw clenched. "Then I assume we're back to deciding." "Showcase participation, I've already decided," came a voice from the back. Mrs. Bennett stood in the doorway, holding a clipboard. "Marcus Jackson will perform, as composer, as pianist, as student." And this time, the room erupted in applause. 1 week later, the Westbrook Spring Arts Showcase took place in the school auditorium, packed wall to wall. Students, parents, local press, and members of the wider community crowded in more than had ever attended before. When Marcus walked onto the stage, the lights briefly blinded him, but then he saw them: Calvin in the front row, Mrs. Bennett beaming beside him, Zoe, Lucas, and Amara in the wings, waiting to join for the finale, and a scattered but powerful presence throughout the crowd, people who believed in him. He sat at the piano, took a breath, and began. His original piece opened with a slow, reverent melody, drawn from "Sometimes I Feel Like a Motherless Child," layered with a batch-like structure, evolving into gospel chords with jazz modulations that Lucas had helped him refine. Amara's voice joined in, soaring raw with truth. Zoe and Lucas entered, their instruments weaving counterpoints and harmonies. The piece ended, not with a grand flourish, but with a whisper: "Just Marcus, alone again," echoing the opening line in a new key. Transformed, the silence that followed was profound. Then, a standing ovation. People didn't just clap, they wept, they shouted. They saw him. After the showcase, as the crowd filtered out, a woman in a sleek suit approached Calvin and Marcus. "I'm Dr. Lenora Carter, from Juilliard's pre-college division," she said, handing Marcus a card. "I believe we should talk." Cardstock announced the evening's theme: excellence through tradition. But beneath the surface, the energy was off. Musicians played with technical accuracy, but little passion. Applause was polite, not thunderous. Students who had remained felt the absence of their peers, especially those who had quietly slipped away to attend a different showcase. Across town, the seats were full, but the room felt hollow. At the Harmony Community Showcase, it was a different story. The audience overflowed into standing areas. Folding chairs had to be brought in from nearby classrooms. Children sat cross-legged on the floor in front of the stage. Elderly church members in their Sunday best smiled as they watched young performers express themselves freely. The air buzzed not with formality, but with joy. Local jazz musicians performed alongside middle schoolers. Spoken word artists followed dancers from a neighborhood studio. Zoe, defying her parents' ban, slipped into the back with Lucas and Amara. Her grandmother had covered for her. Marcus's name appeared last on the program. Reverend Townsend took the stage to introduce him. This young man reminds us all that talent doesn't ask for permission to exist. It simply demands to be heard. Marcus walked onto the stage too. A wave of cheers. He bowed stiffly, then sat. For a moment, the room was completely silent. Then he began to play. His composition opened with the delicate precision of a classical prelude batch by way of Baldwin. Gospel chords emerged like a rising sun, met by jazz improvisations that defied every neat category. Amara's voice joined in, rich and haunting, followed by Lucas's trumpets, sharp, soulful, alive. Together, they told a story that could not be ignored. Marcus closed his eyes. He imagined his mother in the front row, smiling through tears. He imagined her humming the melody, hearing him, loving him. When the final note rang out and faded, there was a pause, a collective breath held in awe before the room erupted. Applause thundered. People stood. Some cried. Calvin did not clap. He simply placed his hand on, despite his attempts to control the narrative. Principal Whitmore found himself answering difficult questions from the school board, the mayor's office, and even state-level educational oversight agencies. The performance disparity between Westbrook's polished, yet soulless showcase and the heartfelt, groundbreaking event at the Harmony Center had exposed the hollow nature of the school's so-called commitment to excellence. Students who had defied Whitmore's mandate and attended Marcus' showcase instead of Westbrook's began organizing, led by Jasmine, Zoe, and others from the orchestra and band. They formed a student coalition called Music Without Walls. Their demands were simple: end discriminatory enforcement of residency rules, broaden the curriculum to include diverse musical traditions, implement a more equitable process for student participation in performances. Faculty members began quietly voicing support. Even some parents, especially after seeing their children inspired by Marcus, joined the call for reform. Whitmore's authority, once absolute, now teetered. The residency hearing, once expected to be a quiet formality to remove the Jacksons, instead became a public event. News crews gathered outside. Inside, community advocates, educators, and legal experts filled the gallery. Calvin, dressed in the same modest suit he'd worn to every pivotal moment, sat beside Marcus and their attorney, Marjorie Turner. Across from them, Whitmore sat with district lawyers, his expression tight. What followed surprised many. Marjorie and her legal team presented not only evidence of selective enforcement of residency policy, but also an alarming pattern of how those rules had been disproportionately applied to families of color over the past decade. Witnesses testified, including Mrs. Bennett and Dr. Wilson, about the targeting of Marcus and the exceptional nature of his talent. Reverend Townsend offered closing remarks that moved even some district officials. The board's decision, delivered days later, was unanimous. The residency claim was ruled to have been enforced discriminatory. Calvin Jackson would be reinstated with full back pay. Marcus' enrollment would be considered valid for the remainder of the academic year. Principal Whitmore was placed on administrative leave, pending a broader review of his conduct. That summer, Marcus flourished at the Juilliard Summer Intensive. He studied alongside some of the most gifted young musicians in the country, yet never felt out of place. He wasn't just good enough, he belonged. His original composition, Silenced Voices, was selected for the program's final recital. This time, he played on a Steinway that needed no repair. The room was full of people who saw his talent not as an exception, but as an expression of a wider excellence, long overlooked. Calvin watched from the audience, Marjorie and Reverend Townsend. Beside him, tears in his eyes again, not from fear, but from awe. After the recital, a well-known composer approached Marcus, I heard your music before I heard your story, she said. Now I see they're one and the same. Don't ever let anyone silence your voice again. In the fall, Marcus began performing at events across the city. He worked with other youth musicians through the Harmony Center, mentoring younger students and composing new works that fused genres, histories, and identities. Westbrook, under interim leadership, began a slow process of reform. Zoe Chen became co-president of the new Student Arts Council. Jasmine received a scholarship to Berklee College of Music, and every so often, someone from Westbrook would show up quietly too, an event at Harmony just to listen. And through it all, Marcus played. Not for trophies, not for acceptance, for truth, for justice, for the music that remembered his mother and helped him find his future. Certainly. Here's a rephrased version of your powerful narrative that preserves the meaning and emotional impact while improving clarity, structure, and flow. It's reworded to sound like the concluding voiceover or narration. For a video or written feature, the stark contrast between the two showcases one exclusive and rigid, the other vibrant and inclusive sparked a wave of difficult but necessary conversations among parents, board members, and school administrators. Just days after the performances, Thomas Williams, Bradley's father, convened an emergency school board meeting. The optics are disastrous, he said plainly. We have a gifted black student, pushed out of our school lonely to receive national acclaim. The narrative writes itself and it doesn't favor Westbrook. The school board responded by launching an independent investigation into Principal Whitmore's actions, uncovering broader patterns of racial bias and discriminatory enforcement of school policies. Under increasing pressure, the district superintendent intervened, reinstating Calvin Jackson with full back pay and issuing a formal apology. The investigation, the letter noted, had been inconsistent with district policy and the principles of equity. And then, a victory no one had anticipated. In response to the public outcry and growing activism, the board reversed its decision to cut music programs. Instead, they passed a district-wide arts initiative aimed at increasing accesses for underserved students. Meanwhile, the students involved in the harassment faced their own consequences. Video evidence allegedly submitted by Jasmine and other members of the orchestra showed Bradley vandalizing the Steinway piano. He received a 1-month suspension and was stripped of all leadership roles. Perhaps, more significantly, his social standing deteriorated. Peers who once followed him began distancing themselves, unwilling to be associated with his actions. When Marcus returned to Westbrook, he walked the halls with new confidence. Some students still eyed him with suspicion, but many more now approached with admiration. Your composition was amazing, one sophomore told him at lunch. Would you write something for our quartet? Requests like that became frequent, and Marcus's musical gifts were finally being recognized beyond the controversy. Even the leadership at Westbrook began to shift. Principal Whitmore submitted his resignation, rather than implement the inclusion policies mandated by the board. His carefully worded statement barely concealed his frustration. After careful reflection, I believe Westbrook will benefit from leadership more aligned with its evolving vision. For weeks after the community showcase, Marcus received an invitation he once thought impossible, a request to perform at the governor's mansion, celebrating cultural diversity and young talent. As Calvin adjusted his son's tie before the performance, his voice wavered. Your mother would be so proud, not just of your music, but of how you've carried yourself, with dignity and grace, far beyond your years. Marcus smiled, thinking of how far they'd come since that unforgettable PTA meeting. I couldn't have done it without you, Dad. That performance led to even more opportunities. A wealthy philanthropist in attendance pledged funds to create a music scholarship in Marcus named specifically for underprivileged youth with exceptional talent. The Harmony Community Center used the donation to expand their music program, hiring instructors and purchasing new instruments, creating a pipeline of opportunity where there once was none. At Westbrook, transformation was underway. Mr. Davis was appointed chair of a new diversity committee, with Calvin Jackson joining as a parent representative. Their first initiative, a district-wide concert series where students from all backgrounds could perform together. Mrs. Bennett, though retired, became a regular mentor to young musicians, beaming with pride as she watched Marcus debut a commissioned piece at McKin Concert Hall. "You've started something," she told him afterward. "Something that will last long after we're gone." One of the most unexpected turns was Marcus' growing friendship with Zoe Chen. Despite her parents' initial reservations, his national recognition and character won them over. She and Marcus discovered a shared love of composition, collaborating on pieces that bridged their culture's Chinese pentatonic scales, dancing with jazz harmonies. "My grandmother says this is what music is for," Zoe told him, "to connect people across boundaries." 1 year after the PTA meeting that began it all, Marcus stepped onto the legendary stage of Carnegie Hall, part of a national showcase for young composers. From the stage, he spotted familiar faces in the crowd: his father, Mrs. Bennett, Professor Reynolds, and supporters from the Harmony Center. Calvin gave a small nod, their silent signal of support since Marcus' very first recital, as Marcus sat at the gleaming Steinway so different from the vandalized one that nearly ended his journey. He reflected on how far he'd come. They had tried to silence him, tried to define him as someone who didn't belong, but his music had proven otherwise. It had become a voice for the voiceless, a declaration that talent isn't determined by zip code, skin color, or social standing. And once more, Marcus let the music speak. Have you ever witnessed someone overcome discrimination to chase their dreams? Has music or art helped you through a difficult time? Share your story in the comments. Let your voice be heard. If Marcus' journey inspired you, please like, subscribe, and share this video. Help us spread more stories that remind the world dignity is not for sale, talent cannot be zoned, and every voice matters. Thank you for joining us on this unforgettable journey. Now, go play your own music, loud enough for the world to hear.